little bit about Ukraine, and I'm cautiously hopeful that the Trump administration is going in the right direction on that. But I'm not so sure about Israel, and I can't tell you how much it has pained me over the last 2 years to watch my tax dollars going to the destruction of the Gaza Strip. Whatever you can say about that particular conflict, however you feel about it, it's been going on for decades. The fact is that no one has explained to me in real comprehensive or convincing terms why it is in U.S. interest to pour billions of dollars into weapons to destroy Gaza and to kill civilians. And I'm concerned as an American that whatever credibility we had following left after the Iraq and Afghanistan debacle, why we would put the rest of that credibility in the toilet as world leaders, as supposed moral leaders of the world, by eschewing international law, by eschewing all of our own principles and values when it comes to starving a population, killing women and children. Again, this has nothing to do with the conflict between Hamas and Israel, but the protection of civilians, which we dedicated a lot of energy and moral authority to after World War II, after what happened in Dresden, after what happened in Japan. And as a Gen Xer, as somebody who had grown up believing that we had limits, that we fought for what was good and what was right, and as however naive that sounds, there was still a shred of that belief. And I saw that all evaporate in the last 2 years. And I have watched as the Trump administration has vacillated back and forth from saying he wants to clear out Palestinians and drive them into other places. I just put up a story a couple of days ago about U.S. officials saying they want to put Palestinians in Sudan and Somalia, two of the most dangerous, poverty-stricken places on earth, and so that Trump could build a Riviera on the Mediterranean. And then he says no, they can stay. Then he says no, they can come back. Then he says no, they have to leave. And I have no idea what he's doing. I don't know if this is some distraction. I don't know if he's just bluffing so that the Arab nations will come in and start taking over some of the responsibility for security and reconstruction there. And then we won't have to. I don't know if he's doing Netanyahu's bidding by wanting to ethnically cleanse the entire Gaza Strip and annex the West Bank. I have no idea. I would like to think that Trump is his own man and that he's not doing the bidding of another country, that he might be like more of a Washingtonian and in the George Washington state of mind where he doesn't believe in entangling alliances, that this is about the United States and its interests. But I don't know. And I'm one of the people who actually keeps an open mind on Trump and his foreign policy. I'm not a never Trumper, but that half of the equation I have less optimism for.
Can I take a stab at this, Joe?
Sure, yeah.
Because I sympathize, Kelley, with your position. The first thing I would return back to Trump's negotiation strategy, and I would say that the American Riviera in Gaza is his version of zero in the opening salvo of negotiations. I think one of the critical elements of this conflict is rooted in laws of international conflict. As an American soldier, I had to wear a uniform and not hide amongst the civilian populace in order to receive proper treatment from an enemy, which I wasn't going to get if I got captured anyway. But, you know, from an incentive structure standpoint, we have these laws in place so that military forces will act accordingly with regard to civilian populations. Coleman Hughes said this, I think, very succinctly, and I think he said it better than I will now. But in a conflict in which your enemies are actively using civilians as human shields and hospitals as infrastructure. If you allow that tactic to work, you have incentivized it internationally. And so I think that is one of the crux of this conflict. Because in a use of force continuum sense, if we allow that tactic to be the dominant tactic for the next generation, we're going to get more of it. And so I think that's where the real rub is. I sympathize because it's an awful situation, and I agree with
It is, and
Kelley with regard to
yeah,
that.
I
But
agree.
yeah,
But I do take offense, not to anything that you said. I take offense when American voices, like Ted Cruz, for example, and even RFK Jr. at one point, have acted as though that our troops have been in similar situations and even have acted less morally than the Israeli military. They have said, "Oh, well, our troops did this. We've been guilty of the same things. This is all about war and the fog of war and whatnot." I covered, I wasn't there, so I covered from Washington in a very cushy perch, I guess, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq as a young writer, maybe not too young, and the wars in the battles in Fallujah, for example. I did not see the kind of behavior that I'm seeing by the IDF in Gaza. And you could say, well, they're hiding among the population. Well, let's consider the situation. We evacuated Fallujah, or we helped to evacuate most of the civilians before we started bombing the shit out of them, which they can't. These poor people can't get out of Gaza. So there has to be a consideration of different tactics. And everything you just said presupposes that Israel is always telling the truth about everything, like the Hamas and the hospitals, the Hamas and the population. It also denies the fact that Israel has been using Palestinians as human shields, like having them go in front of them when they go into buildings. And they admitted that just the other day. So I feel like we have to keep an open mind and not be so deferent to everything that Israel says on the ground there. And I certainly take I take umbrage with the idea that they have been protecting civilians from the beginning, because that's the narrative they've been pushing. Our own soldiers, the Americans, have had rules of engagement where and sometimes they're criticized because they do look out for civilians.
my experience with Hamas, if I'm asked to believe one or the other, I tend toward Israel. I reserve the right to criticize Israel. I'm not taking money from AIPAC, for example. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But again, it's the nature and the terrain of Gaza makes things complicated in that you have a captive civilian population,
Right.
that is an asset to Hamas, in that sense. We do have examples of Israel sending in hit teams into the hospitals rather than leveling the hospital. Those are at least examples of restraint that if Israel was doing what its critics say across the board, that would be an exception or atypical to the narrative. But yeah, this is a complicated and
Yeah.
terrible dynamic. My concern is the tactics that we're incentivizing. That's job one internationally, beyond the Israel-Gaza conflict. This is the global consequences.